Happy New Year, everybody. Welcome back to the first Nature Journal Club workshop of 2017. I personally don't believe in New Year's resolutions. I think if there's something that you want to do, you should start doing that whenever you realize that's something that you ought to do. And if you are considering, this is the year I'm really going to dive into this nature journaling and make this happen, what I want to suggest to you is that it's the habit of journaling on a regular basis is what's going to make the difference. We are creatures of habit, so if it wasn't your habit to be nature journaling in 2016, it won't be your habit to do it in 2017, and we tend to do today what we did yesterday. And changing a habit, you can do it, it's possible, but it takes work and effort. But once you get into the point where it's your routine, it starts to take care of itself because it's your habit to be journaling on all the time. If you start jonesing for your journal, if you don't have a chance to kind of grab your sketchbook for a day and kind of run out, or you see something, you're thinking, oh, if only I had my journal. That's the point you want to get yourself to. And the way you do that is just by starting to use your journal on a more regular basis. So think about how accessible your journal is to you. Think about how much hassle it is to get it. Do you only bring it for special journaling occasions, or do you have it with you all the time? If it's something that's only for special times, see what you can do to make your journal more mainstream. If you push yourself just to journal on a more regular basis this month, you're going to create the habit that's going to carry into the rest of the year. And journaling it's really a numbers game. If you get yourself into the habit where you're journaling a lot, well, you end up journaling a lot, and it just gets better and better and better and better. So the number one thing you can do to really help yourself is just realize this year I might give myself a little bit of a push either to start journaling on a more regular basis or to kind of increase the number of times you're kind of getting your stuff out. But know that that's going to take a little bit of work because you have to break the old habit. But once you do, that will be the new normal. And so think to yourself, how often do you want to be doing this? And are you doing that right now? If not, it's not wanting to do it that's going to make that difference. You're going to have to really proactively make yourself do it, and just a few weeks of doing that, starting right now, is going to make a huge difference for you. Today, I want to show you folks some stuff that will make a little bit of your field sketching easier, and will open up some doors to different ways of handling landscapes. So we're going to be looking at how to do the 5-minute landscape, which I think is, once I added the 5-minute landscape routine to my bag of tricks, I find myself doing it all the time. There's nothing wrong with sitting down and spending a lot of time making one landscape, but you want to have in your bag of tricks the ability to sit down and on the spot essentially take a snapshot in your journal and look at a few reasons why this is so great and how to make that logistically easier. And I want to show you today several different, let's see here. Today I'm going to show you several different media that you can use that work. And you do not have to do, in case you can't see these in the back of the room, I've got here, we're going to be first starting off with graphite pencil. And this is something that most of us are familiar, but we're going to be using it in a really specific way with a little blending tool. And not using these blending tools the way that most people think about the way you use them. We're actually turning these blending tools into paintbrushes. We'll be taking a look at using a watercolor pencil. Not a full set of watercolors, but one dark valued, fairly neutral colored watercolor pencil. It's an awesome tool for fast sketching in the field. We'll also be taking a look at using 2 different types of pens. And lastly, 2 different approaches to using watercolor for fast sketches. You do not have to adopt and learn all of these, but my hope is that there's going to be one technique here of these. You've got a couple of pencil ones, a couple of pen ones, and a couple of watercolor ones that will fit into your workflow, your routine, the sorts of media that you like to use. Some people hate using pens, some people love using pen. So if you're a pen person, You might get some really good ideas in this section. Pencil people up here, watercolor people down here. But don't feel that you're supposed to, like in my journal, I'm supposed to be doing this and this and this and this and this. I say use what you like, what you're comfortable with, and that way just logistics of using the tools gets out of your way. And so we're going to look at how to do this fast. So first I want to present with you one of the challenges of doing landscape drawing. There you are in the great outdoors. Right? Wow, look over there. And what happens is you're thinking in this monumental landscape, you think, oh my gosh, I want to make to kind of celebrate this somehow in my journal. Wouldn't it be nice to make a landscape drawing? And then you start trying to figure out what should I do my landscape drawing of? And there's so many choices. And so very often what people choose to do is to not make a choice. Where I'm just going to sit here on this stump and do everything. Right? And this very quickly gets overwhelming. Right? I mean, there's an awful lot of choices out there. Right? And so then what will often happen is if this, oops, that doesn't show up very well. I'll try this orange one. I hope it'll be, can that be seen?
Yeah.
All right, so what people will do when they try to do everything is they open up their journal and they start drawing. Okay, I've got my El Capitan over here in my Clouds Rest, and then I get into my half dome over here, and I'm coming up, and you run out of paper before you get to Bridal Veil Falls. Does anybody run out of page doing a landscape? You can take another journal and stick it on there. The other thing that happens here, so first of all, this process takes a very long time. If you're traveling with other people, we're done with lunch. Well, let's go. And you're like, actually, could you guys just hang on for another maybe 2 hours and 45 minutes because I'm kind of doing a little sketch here. Right? It makes you a very unpopular traveling companion. Right? And also, partway through it, you get really sick of drawing trees. Right? So doing this detail it's a huge time suck. And you're sick of it. And the more you get sick of drawing trees, the more you start spacing them out more, and then you kind of go like, yeah, these are trees. And then you don't like that. The whole thing took a long time. And as your interest in it, or if you get impatient with it, that's going to be reflected in what you get. So, if it doesn't work, you now have a whole bunch of negative reinforcement. The next time that you're thinking, maybe I should sit down and do a landscape sketch, you're going to go like, I remember what happened last time. Oh, my friends abandoned me, and they took the lunch, and it took so long, and then the shadows changed on this while I was drawing it, and I got sick of drawing trees. There must be a better way. And then people go like, oh yes, iPhone 7. Click. Got it, right? But wait. There is a solution to this, and what it is the landscapito. So the idea of the landscapito is, we were used to thinking landscapes like Bierstadt style, right? Or Moran. Here's this giant, giant canvas. And so that's why we turn our journal sideways and start working on both pages. Because we're used to thinking landscape equals monumental size drawing. But if you take that big landscape and you make it smaller, all sorts of interesting things happen. So small for these little landscape drawings, small is beautiful. If I have a drawing that is this big, literally that big, I can finish a little landscape drawing in there easily in less than 5 minutes. If I'm trying to add an area of tone in it, the tip of my pencil is so broad that I've got a whole area of tone. If I was doing something on that scale and I wanted to fill something like that, then I've got all these little pencil lines taking forever. This texture shows up. Also, in something this big, I can't put in detail. By its size, it says no detail. And detail is one of the big time sucks. So it forces you to look at value and shapes. And it turns out on drawings where you look at values and shapes, those are often much better than drawings where you get wrapped around the axle about And also, but you think of, well, maybe I'll make this a little bit larger. If I double the size of this little landscape drawing, how much more area do I have to cover?
4 times.
Ooh, isn't that, so I doubled it. You're saying 4?
Well, you got 2 axes.
Exactly right. So it goes up by the square, right? So if I've made the side twice as large, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 times as much space. Exactly right. So you double the size of your drawing, you quadruple the amount of trees you now have to draw, right? And if I keep it small, I can do a drawing in 5 minutes, I can do another one in 5 minutes. Instead of spending your entire time focusing on this one view, this will allow you to kind of go around in the landscape and go, I really like that little moment over there. I like that little moment over there. You can look around and see the things that you're the most interested in and focus on those. Also, by the way, the parts of a landscape drawing that you're the most interested in, guaranteed to be the parts that will be the most interesting, right? And very often you can look at somebody's landscape drawing and go like, you had fun doing this part. And they're like, oh yeah, I was just in love with those rocks. And this part over here, yeah, not so much. I kind of had to do that because it was in my picture. Right? So you can tell those parts. So what if you just did the part that you love? And that part that you don't have to do. Right? So you look around the landscape, instead of going to do everything, what if you say like, ooh, I like, so what, if you were there, what might be some things here that you'd like, oh, I like that?
The angle of the wall on El Cap, I love that angle.
Okay, you're drawing that over there.
I'd be there.
Ooh, you're right over there. What else? Where else could you go?
Half dome.
But yeah, we got the half dome watchers, right? Right? Ooh, half dome. That's really nice. Ooh, okay. So maybe this on waterfall.
And
Right.
what, I can't remember what you call the 2 bumpy peaks over there.
Are those sentinel rocks?
I can't remember.
We'll have to get a Yosemite person in there. I wish Beth Pratt was here. She'd be like, oh, I know that. All right? So you look around, you figure out what you like to do, and you do that. Right? If that's what you like, that's what you do. Right? Now, if you say, but actually I am kind of drawn to this sort of wide sweep and how many things are stuck together, you can do that. And you can also do that, but you can do that on a smaller scale. Instead of saying, oh, I want to do everything, so I better make it big because I want to get the detail in on half dome. You want to get detail in on half dome, do a little half dome landscaping. Right? You like that waterfall over there, do the waterfall landscaping. Right? You like that, but in this one, the more monumental the landscape that you're trying to do, I find for me, the smaller I make that. Right? So when I'm really trying to show, right? Instead of getting 7 sketchbooks and gluing them together, right? Just make that smaller, and you can get away with it. So here, this little pot here, I'm blowing, that I can kind of get away with blowing up big. By the way, on a landscape drawing, if most of it is sky, it doesn't take much time to do. Right? See, another advantage of this is that you are now in control of your composition. And this is huge. One of the ways to get a better drawing is to think a little bit more upfront about what the composition is. And for most little landscape drawings, people aren't really thinking about that. What they're thinking about is, what's the most comfortable place to sit? Because I'm going to be here for the next 3 hours, I better find a really comfy place. And then you bust out your journal and you start drawing. I like half dome. We're going to draw a half dome and put that in the middle. And you start drawing out until you get to the edges of your page. What's happened is the size of your journal page has now determined your composition. It's not a choice that you made. It was given to you by the size of your journal. Right? And so very often people get these compositions with the center of attention right in the middle. Things dividing the composition directly in half. These are things that make a composition less interesting. But if instead you're going like, I really like that little half dome right there, right? Right, so if I had a little half dome moment going on, and I control my composition, I can do that. Ooh. Right? And you get to play with, what's the last time you really got to play with a vertical format? Or a long horizontal format? What you can also do, so you controlling where the edges of this are, That's going to improve each of those little drawings. So what I'll often do is say, okay, I want to do half tone there. I'm going to put up these little two L's, turn one towards me, and now I'm going to say, okay, there's my vertical format. Do I want to do horizontal? What would that look like on the page? I can make those decisions. Very often, a photographer who can do their photograph with one click will spend more time framing their shot than a lot of landscape sketchers. They can just do it with a click. You're going to be spending, 5 minutes, right? So spend part of that just deciding what you're going to do, right? So this gives you more, it allows you to be playful with your compositions. When's the last time you did a really vertical format, right? How would that change how you look around a landscape if you did? That could be really fun. Then what you can also do is not just have a more interesting composition within each one, but you can take those little pieces and on a page, because they only take 5 minutes, you can do a bunch of little landscapes and put those together in a meta composition, a composition of compositions, right? And I will tell you that this approach is a better memory cue to an experience than sitting trying to spend several hours just doing one thing, because you then get so wrapped up in what's on the paper instead of looking out there. This gets you looking out there more than at your paper. Right? It's as if you're going to sit on a hillside above a little village and like draw the town, versus sitting up on the hillside, making a little sketch, drawing down the town, then walking down into the town and going, ooh, look at that little flower pot, drawing the flower pot. Walking, oh, look at the laundry on that line, all those different colors. That's really, make a little sketch of that. Look at that doorway over there, and that group of people huddled around the farmer's market stand. Make a little sketch over there. That experience is going to be a much better brain food and stimulation for your memory of this experience than spending the whole time in that one spot. Again, when you choose to do a big landscape, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Another great thing to do. I'm saying that this is different, and this is good too. But it's usually not in people's repertoires. We're used to drawing big. As a matter of fact, I've been teaching, so I've been teaching this class all week. And people in a number of the classes, they've been following along with a number of my step-by-step demonstrations. We'll be having some of those. And I started to, towards the end, kind of walk around the room while they were doing them and look at what people were doing. And it was really interesting. I would be telling people, like, this is a landscape I did, and it was this big, right? And then I'm walking around the room, and people are copying the demonstration that I'm doing this big, right? So in the lecture where I'm saying making this big, right? We're so conditioned to making big landscapes that it's a weird thing to start trying, but I'm going to suggest try it. If you decide you don't like it, fine, right? But a number of people who tried the small ones, they were coming up to me just with big bright eyes saying, look at what happened. Look at what happened. This is the best little landscape I've ever done. I got one of those the other day. I said, this is the best landscape drawing I've ever done. Right? It was a little. All right, so let's take a look at using some of those media to allow you to do this. And what does that look like? All right, here we go. So this is, kind of going back here, I'm going to take a look at kind of this sort of a view here. Right, I like those three big rocks, that waterfall going down there, some sky. Again, you're in charge of what the composition is. You can cut it here, right? You can make it this way. You decide those sorts of things. And what I will sometimes do is just try to get the bare bones down of what I'm doing. This actual drawing literally is this big. Right? Kind of this shrunk into here. So this is this thickness of my pencil stroke. The pencil that I'm using here, I use a mechanical pencil with 2B lead. Right? 2B lead is soft enough that I can punch in some really dark darks. What I also find is that a fairly broad, dull point is very helpful for making. If you get something that only makes very fine lines, first of all, as you're drawing quickly, that pencil tip will keep breaking. The other thing that happens is because it just makes a fine little skinny line, it says, like, come in here, I'm making skinny lines, make detail with me. But if you've got something that makes these big, broad things, you tend to focus on value and chunking your landscape, and that's going to be more effective. So I use a 0.7 millimeter mechanical pencil. So that gives me a bigger lead. Most mechanical pencils are 0.5 millimeters. So this is a bigger lead. So actual size compared to this drawing, this is how big my pencil is. Right? So this is a small drawing. But you notice, so you can tell that from the thickness of these lines, right? Those are just a pencil line. So I've got that. And what I first do is I'll block in roughly what I have. If you, sometimes on these very small ones, you don't even need to first block it in with a non-photo blue pencil. As they get larger, I find that becomes increasingly useful. But sometimes, if you like initially blocking things in with a non-photo blue pencil, you can do that. In this case, I didn't. And what I'm trying to do is just get the major elements of my landscape. The next step is really fun. I've drawn this. Instead of drawing my frame first, I do this, and then I think, where exactly on this do I want my frame edges to be? So if I've got this, I can then look at how much, when I put my frame on it, it's going to start to feel like, ooh, now it's like a landscape drawing. Isn't it, you sort of feel that psychological difference from this to like, ooh, right? It's fun. So you get to creatively choose where you're going to put this frame in. And is it going to be tall, skinny? Is it going to be what shape? We've seen so many kind of 8.5 by 11 size, sort of photograph size pictures. That tends to be the dimensions that we gravitate towards. But you don't have to stay within that box. So you can get skinny, you can get long, you can make landscapes of all sorts of shapes. So I'll put that frame in. And now I'm going to add not detail, but value. So value is the fancy name just for the difference between dark and light. So I'm going to put in my darks and lights. We human beings see all these different shades of gray. And so a lot of times people think of, well, what you want to do is then have dark and smoothly graduate into all these other shades of gray. But our brains cannot handle even 50 shades of gray, right? So, if you're thinking of like 50 shades of gray, what's the difference between number 37 and 42, right? Right? 37, 39, right? It's overwhelming to think of like, are those trees, even like the number 9 gray or the... Instead, what I do is I use a very simple value scale. I will have my darkest dark, perhaps 2 or 3 shades of pale gray in the white of my paper. So at the most, that's 4 different values. Sometimes it's just 3. And what's neat about this is that when you put those in, the viewer will turn those chunked values, and when I'm sort of chunking values, you're deciding that's my darkest part, I'm going to make sure that's clearly darker than the other things. That's my lightest gray. I'm going to make sure, and then there's the shape of my medium. You're making those deliberate decisions instead of just kind of, oh, it's getting lighter, getting lighter, getting lighter. You're thinking in chunks, gunk, gunk, gunk. And when people look at it, their brains will turn that into 50 shades of gray, or more. Right? So here I have 1, 2, 3 shades of gray. And you look at this and you're not thinking, oh my gosh, you only have 3 values in this drawing. Your brain is going to sort of fill in all the edges around those 3 decisions that you make. But you're being deliberate about where you're putting each of those. Here's the waterfall trick. The waterfall trick is if you want to draw a waterfall, don't draw the waterfall. You can't draw the waterfall. Right? You draw the wet rocks around the waterfall. And you get the waterfall. But if you draw the waterfall, then it's actually the brightest thing out there. So leave the waterfall. Leave the waterfall alone. Just leave waterfall alone.
Not even a little circle.
Hey, good to see you.
See you later.
So then I could stop here, but we're going to actually do one other thing that's really fun. What I'm going to do is pull out one of these blending tools, here shown life size, relative to this drawing. So these are rolled pieces of paper. And people use these to sort of smear and smudge. If I want to get rid of some of this zebra striping up here in my sky, I can take my paper and smooth that together. That's nice, and so that's what a lot of people do. They'll say, oh, I just need to now go in here and smooth these areas. Sometimes that's not really necessary to do. Like down here, it might be actually nice to have some texture in my trees. But here's the cool thing. What that does is it gets some graphite on the tip of this blending tool. So you blend with it. That blending tool now has graphite on its tip. And what you can do is come along and use that just like a paintbrush to paint in a few of the details on this. So let's take the blending tool and blend it. Smooth that, and then see how I paint it in here? So I'm using it to paint with. One big warning on this, it's fun to do. And so what happens is you start blending the entire thing and you don't leave any of the whites. Leave some of those whites. I want those whites to be contrast. Right? So, so I want some of those whites to be contrast. But it's really easy just to kind of get in there. Oh, this blending thing, I can really like paint with it. Wow, where else can I do that? You know? Instead of thinking, I want to leave the light on these parts of the rocks. So restraint is required with it, but it's a really useful tool. And look at the cool effects you get. The last thing I'm going to do is add a tiny amount of detail in stomp. So for detail, I'm going to add a few trees into this shape here. Right now, this sort of dark, jaggedy area. If I put a few kind of deliberate tree-ish looking shapes in here, this whole zone will feel like trees. I'm also going to take a few of the edges and crisp those up a little bit so that they pop out more. A bold, harder line pops something forward. I want this to clearly stand out against these distant hills. So I put in a little bit of detail. Look, there's my trees without the trees, with the trees, without the trees, with the trees. Right? Not really much detail in trees, but that's enough that you look at that and you go, oh, those are trees. And then without the reinforced edge, and with it. And then you stop. The whole thing, because it's small, less than 5 minutes. Nice thing about this is if you didn't like it, you only spent 5 minutes doing it. You can do another. If you're going to have one big take-home on this, it would be about leaving those whites. That's the hard part. Because you just want to blend, because it's cool to do. Let's take a look at another pencil technique. This time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab a watercolor pencil. So watercolor pencils are pencils that the pigment which it puts down on the paper is soluble in water. So when you hit it with a brush in water, it will dissolve out. But I start just treating it like a regular pencil. This drawing of El Capitan is this big. Most of that is going to end up being sky and big blank areas of rock. So even though this is fairly larger, there's a bunch of territory in that is, actually that's even larger than it was. I think I did this is about like that. Okay. So I first just block in my major shapes. Well, as you said, what are the angles of the massive El Cap? I want to get those angles and sort of capture that. So no detail is on here. And then the fun part of adding in the frame. I get to decide where on this do I want to have my frame. Generally what I'm thinking of is I want the area of sky to be a different size, a different volume than the area of this, than the area of this, and the area of this, and the area of this. If I have a series of different sizes, people sometimes talk about this as Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear. If the sizes of Papa Bear, Mama Bear, Baby Bear, these masses, this sky wants to then be a different size. If it's the same as this, that is going to be visually less interesting. So very often, I'm just looking for the sizes of the masses of things on my paper to be different, and I can get that by just choosing where I put my frame. Now on top of this, I'm going to do the same 3 values thing. I'm going to have dark, middle value, and light. Dark, middle value, and light. I should also notice here that in these foreground trees, you can see those big pencil strokes. That actually shows you how thick my pencil is, gives you an idea of the size of this drawing. But notice that this area in the foreground is busier than this. This is much more smooth. This is busy. I've talked before in other workshops about how detail, if you have part that's detailed, that pops forward. Our brain treats busyness in a picture the same way. So a part of a drawing that's really busy with, visually active stuff like this will feel like it's coming forward in a picture. Our brain kind of treats that, that busyness must be detail. Detail, therefore it must be close to me. Right? And so I'm intentionally having this foreground be busier. If any of these vertical strokes show up in the final thing, they will feel kind of like little parts of trees, vertical trees, rather than sort of random scribbles everywhere. But notice again, I'm being deliberate with 3 steps in value. Out there in the field, my brain can handle that. And then I'm going to start adding my water. And look what happens. So I put the water on that, and this dissolves into this. Notice there's a little bit of a value change. This is actually lighter. This turned a little bit darker, so I'm filling in all those spaces. Note also that I'm leaving some whites. Where have we heard that before? Leaving some parts untouched. It's so much fun to put this water on that you want to put the water everywhere. Resist, right? Don't go there. You can't, you want to leave some parts with that bright white of the paper that gives you more contrast in your drawing. And then into the foreground, so I first did all the light parts, and then I'm going to come in and do those dark parts. Some of these marks show through, and it feels kind of like trees. I will be putting these step-by-steps up on my blog with sort of high-resolution images that you can kind of go through slowly. Just remember, if you're trying this at home, these aren't like this. It's like that. So try it's the ito in the landscape ito that you want to be kind of getting. A lot of people, I don't really like doing a lot of drawing and coloring with sets of watercolor pencils where I'm trying to do all the coloring with them. I've got some strategies that where you can get away with that, and some brands of watercolor work better at that. With a lot of watercolor pencils though, you get something on your paper that looks like a green that's similar to what you're seeing, and the minute you hit it with water, it changes to, all of a sudden it's a screaming chartreuse, and gets lighter, and so there'll be these big sort of weird changes that you didn't expect. And so that is something that kind of bugs me about, sometimes working with watercolor pencils can be very surprising. But when you're just using one color, and you're making a monochromatic study like this, it's a very fast, efficient, quick way to sketch. So that's 2 techniques with pencils. We're now going to look at 2 techniques with pens. Well, I've got to go for one question. Yes?
So, just to be clear, did you use a regular, you were talking about 2B pencil, graphite pencil, and then also a watercolor pencil? Both
Right.
of those are on the, oh, okay.
Yes. So 2 different pencils.
Oh, that's-
So the first one was with a graphite pencil. And the graphite pencil I can smooth with the blending tool. This is then done with a watercolor pencil. It's a little bit more, it doesn't really smear as well with the blending tool, but I can add the water to it. and I get these effects.
Did you add the water with a brush, or how did you add that?
This water I added with a water brush. So I have a little brush that, I've got actually a picture of it coming up in a little bit, a brush that in the handle of it, you have the water. I use the Pentel aquash large fine point water brush. On my website, on the techniques and equipment page, on the equipment links, underneath the nature journaling or nature drawing section, I spell out the details of that brush. Pentel makes several water brushes with different size points. I use the largest one. It comes to a really sharp point, and it's my favorite go-to brush. Does somebody have one? Oh, great. This is how it looks. So for friends at home, this is, so it's got a narrow side and a fat side, so when you put it down on your table, it doesn't roll. It carries a lot of water. This comes to a very sharp point. Something I really like about this versus other brands is that the spring in the tip of it reminds me of a good quality watercolor brush. Others are more mushy. I don't like that. Something you have to do to help take care of it when you're done, just clean the brush off. I just wipe it on a rag while I squeeze it. Wipe, wipe, wipe. And then I roll the tip like that, and I look at it making sure there's no one bristle that's going off to the side. When I put the cap on, I don't want to pin a bristle out or it'll be permanently out of commission. I'll then have to snip it off. So once I'm sure that there's none like that, I put the cap on, and listen to this. This is a really nice thing about it. You hear that click? That cap's not coming off accidentally in my backpack. So this is the Pentel large point aquash water brush. 5 stars. I laughed, I cried.
What's the general price?
About $9. And they last a long time. Really good little brush. So now let's take a look at 2 techniques using pen. Right? Some pens are waterproof. Other pens, you go out in the rain and drip, 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 all these sort of blotches appear and your ink goes away. Those are the pens that I'd actually use for this. And I'm going to take advantage of the fact that they're waterproof. So it starts with, this is one where I'm going to try to do one of these sort of larger panoramics. This entire drawing that I'm about to show you is this big. Right? So it's a long horizontal one, but it's small. And so this is Half Dome out here. I really can't get detail in it. Right? That's why I've got a different drawing over on the side that I did of Half Dome, but in this that's going to allow me to get the full kind of sweep of this thing. So I start with just a line drawing, and here is my pen for scale. All right, so I'm using a little Pilot razor point pen here. My mom always used to have these around the house, so I've just got a special fondness for these little yellow top things. I'd always steal her pens and go draw with them and put them back when we ran out of ink. But yeah, so those are some of my favorite little pens. I've just got to, they kind of remind me of my childhood. So I used that one, and then what I do on that is same thing, drop in that frame, and look at, again, it could be this magical moment, you go ping! Isn't that, you can feel it, right? It's like, this is actually different than this. And then 3 values of hatching lines. Dark, medium, light. And then the white. Dark, medium, light. So this is all this pen in here. It's in here for 2 reasons. One, I want to put some stuff in this dark area. But then I'm going to be bringing my brush into this and picking up this ink to paint the rest of this. So here's my water brush to scale. I'm going to start in some of the lighter areas of this, and I'm just brushing this in here. This with a denser area, this is a little bit darker. And then I can take that, my brush now gets ink from my paper on it, and I come into these cliffs here and I can do all that. Isn't that neat? Again, it's fun to do. Warning, 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 danger, you're going to want to cover the entire thing and not leave any whites. Make sure you're leaving some whites, right? In all these things, these little kind of, oh, now I can paint with it, those parts are fun. And so we tend to overdo it. Then I'm going to come into my darkest part, pick up this ink and use it to paint my sky. Isn't that fun? Again, leaving some of those whites is critical. Areas that are distant, no detail. The closer you are, you get a little bit more detail in there. Actually, partway through the sky, I should say that my brush ran out of ink from here. So off on the side of my paper, I just made a few little squiggles and dipped into that like a little inkwell and kept on painting this. And that Pilot razor point pen, it's got this nice little kind of almost purplish tone to it. You can go into an art supply store near you, a local independent art supply store, and they've got those tester pieces of paper. Write the name of the pen, do a little squiggle, right, and then pull your water brush out of your pocket and stroke it on there, and you'll see that different types of pens will kind of turn to fluid ink at different rates. Some are kind of, there's a range from permanent to really soluble, and play with ones that you like. You'll also see that the inks from these pens that all look black, when they turn into liquid, this one is kind of purplish. Others are kind of brownish. Others are more bluish. Others are more neutral grayish. Find one color that you like and get that pen. Hardest thing to do is the restraint, because this, I got positive feedback from doing this, right? When you get positive feedback from doing something, your brain wants to do it again, which means, oh, fill more in, right? So when you're still kind of getting that positive feedback from it, I need to stop before I overwork it. Let's take a look at, so here's another Pilot razor point pen drawing, El Cap, your view, with now getting a little bit closer to Half Dome out there. This drawing is a little bit bigger. This one is about that big. But again, a lot of it's going to be sky. On this one, so I did my initial lines with this pen. Now I'm going to put it in my frame. I like having just sort of the edge of El Capitan's other face right here. It's also something neat happens when the drawing continues on outside the borders of that frame. All right, it gives it a softer and more permeable edge. And actually, let's say something a little bit more about a softer edge. With formal mechanical drawing, something that they really sort of prize is one very clean, deliberate edge. You'll notice in this, look at this area right here. I've got this line here, there's this line out here, there's sort of, what's going on is I'm making this line kind of, this edge sort of loosely with several lines, and then kind of coming into it and going, yeah, that is my line. Sometimes on a more organic form, this softens the edge of a pencil line and can make something that's an organic shape look a little bit. I wouldn't really go for this on, like, if you're drawing the race car, right? But on organic forms, sometimes these more, several lines then kind of converge to make the edge. I like that effect. Now I'm going to bust out my Tombo pen. This is a Tombo dual art pen, not to scale. And what it has is a big brush tip on one side and a small one on the other. And what I'm going to do with it is brush in my one shade of gray. With these, does anybody have one in the room? So on the discussion for the website, I suggested that people get two specific pens. There is a lighter one, and then there's this other one that's just a little bit darker. So notice that this isn't the black one. This is the lightest shade of gray, and then this is just a little bit lighter than that. It turns out that this one is plenty dark. Even though you're thinking like, oh no, that's going to be just this ghostly gray. Also with these, if I put a stroke of gray down with this brush, and then stroke over that another time, it gets a little bit darker. So I can build up darker with multiple coats of these things. So with these two pens, I first get the lightest one, right, and put in, leaving some whites. Then I get my darker one and put that in. Again, restraint, 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 restraint. It's fun to do, and so you want to go crazy with it. But less will be more. And this stuff is also really water soluble. So what I can then do is, is take my water brush again, dip it into these, and blend those out. Again, leave some whites. Here, I haven't added any water. Here I haven't added water. Here I have added water. And actually, I think it's some of the purple that's coming out in here is also from that razor points line. On some paper, it really depends on the type of paper you're using. When you go in there and you brush into the Tombo ink, it lifts out so well that you actually make the ink that was here lighter. You make this part lighter. And then you can get another shade there. So you'll have the darker part where you didn't hit it with the water. The lighter part of that dark where you did put the water in, and then you can use that ink that you get to put in other places. It's really going to depend on the type of paper that you have, but sometimes you can, so just play, take a few Tombo markers and put them out on the type of sketchbook paper you use, play with it and sort of see, for a stroke this big, how much gray do I get washed out of that? Yes?
So the lines of this drawing, are they soluble as well?
Yes, so those were done with that initial pilot razor point.
So why aren't they bleeding?
They are, just not as much. You'll notice that in, so these edges are bleeding a little bit, but I'm really not kind of working over them. You see this is sort of a softer, fuzzier edge there. Let's go back in here. So we get crisper edges. So these things will get sort of softer and fuzzier. Back on this one here, you'll notice you still see those lines. So that's two approaches with pen. And what this Tombo thing is nice, it's nice, it gives you big areas of value and gets you thinking about value. Lastly, I'm going to show you two approaches with watercolor. The second one is going to be a more approach that is more similar to what most people do with watercolor. The first one, I think, is, if you really mess around with this, I think this is, and so folks at home, I'm talking to you, this is the single best exercise you can do to get better at watercolor. Coming up in just a moment, right? But what we have a tendency to do is to do the second one, but this first one is a really high percentage way to improve the quality of your watercolor. There's a wonderful saying that is, value does all the work and color gets all the credit. A fellow in my class yesterday sort of brought that up, and I think that's absolutely spot on. We get really wrapped around the axle about color. And what we end up doing is ignoring value. Value, again, is the difference between light and dark. Value, having your values accurately observed in a drawing is more important than what you do with the color. We are used to color doing all sorts of wacky things. As clouds move across the sun, the colors of everything around us changes dramatically. In the evening, we don't go walk around and go like, oh man, I'm really freaking out, my house is turning color, right? We're just used to things changing all sorts of interesting colors in different sorts of light. Meaning, you can get away with having all sorts of crazy things going on with your color, but not with your values, right? But people get so beelined in on, I gotta match that color, that we skip the values, right? So this first one is a value study. What we're gonna do is use one color of watercolor. This will be a color that can go dark successfully, right? A color that when you put it in sort of a denser concentrations, you can really push to darks. I usually do one that's sort of a neutral color. Here I'm going to be using one that's sort of a purplish gray. And, but we're going to see what can happen, how if you want to do fast little landscapes with watercolor, forget about what color things are, get yourself to focus on value with just one color. You're thinking, but I want my blue sky, I want my green grass. If you focus on this, it will train your brain to notice color more accurately. The other thing it will do is it will help you just focus on water control. How much water is in my brush, how much water is on the paper, how much pigment is there. You can focus on that without getting distracted by color. And if you get better at water control and looking at values, you will progress so much more quickly than somebody who is trying to just match color, match color, match color, match color, and missing the importance of values. We're going to start with a graphite pencil drawing though. So here's a graphite pencil drawing. This drawing, so I've blocked it out. Here's a little half dome moment. We're going to zoom in on half dome on this one. This is a larger drawing, so my pencil to scale here is a bit larger. This completed drawing was about, I don't know, a little bit smaller than that, about like that. But again, it's going to have lots of, sometimes if I am doing a larger drawing, people are like, I thought you said do like landscape ethos stuff so you don't have to do as much detail. Very often you'll see that like the amount of stuff we've actually done a landscape is just small down there. So this will be, right? So I frame it in. At this point, I then back off and I look, I do my quality control. How wide is this? Very often you'll make something that stands out to you too big. Like did I make, because half dome is cool, did I make it too high? Right? What did I do here? How's that working? And if I like it, then I'm ready to go on. Here I noticed that I made one of the most common composition, not composition mistakes, but sort of drawing mistakes. Something that adds a lot of confusion into a drawing. And what it is called a line adjacency, or a triple junction. So there's one part of this drawing that is confusing. Right there. Right? So I have 3 lines coming together at the same place. And this is a real place for confusion. Does that, because that could be read as I've got a line here with something hanging down from it, like a waterfall. Right? That could be read as I have a back cliff here and then something else kind of hiding behind it here. Or what I meant to show is that it's a cliff here with something else kind of tucking behind it. All I have to do is move this line down a little bit and I don't have a triple junction. Right? So right there is a point for confusion. I saw it on here and I looked back at my thing, and fortunately in this case I saw that actually this line does kind of dive down here. So I go in to reinforce my lines and kind of clean them up, add a little bit of detail, fix a few of those edges. That's a lot less confusing than this. Right? So I fixed that little triple junction and added my frame. No frame, big frame. Again, mostly sky. Sky, again, is an easy kind of composition fix. You draw a drawing of Half Dome that you think is just like where it's just too much in the middle, just add more sky onto that. And hey, you're no longer in the middle. You could add more land, but then you have to draw the land. Now I'm going to strengthen a couple of the lines in the foreground. See how that pops them forward? These, because they're the same line weight, feel like they're kind of on the same plane. This says this stuff is closer than this, because I've made those lines a little bit stronger.
And we're using permanent or water soluble?
Oh, this is regular graphite. Just regular,
That's still,
so not my water soluble ones. I like to, when I'm doing a watercolor painting, work most of the values out just with my graphite pencil. So I'm going to draw in my trees, again thinking 3 areas of value: dark, middle, and light. Dark, middle, light. And at this point, I could get out a blending tool and just treat this as a regular graphite drawing. Or I could get out one color, here I'm going to use sort of a purple-gray color of watercolor, and turn this into a watercolor drawing. Generally with watercolor, you start lighter and you work darker in layers. So I'm going to start lighter. Here, I've got this purple-gray, some on Half Dome here, leaving some whites. On the stuff in the background, I don't have, here you see there's a lot of contrast here, darker, lighter, darker, lighter. Right. Less contrast in the background. Yes?
I got a last, the up and down verticals, that's with your graphite pencil?
That's with graphite pencil.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, so those up and down verticals are all with graphite pencil. Then what I'm going to do is put on top of that my dark paint. Keeping in mind these 3 value areas: darker, medium, lighter here. And I also am putting a few kind of blotches of dark in here. This makes this zone busier, and busy pops forward. Notice that some of those vertical lines of the pencil show through. And because they do, they just feel like, oh, look, there are some trees there. That dark mass is trees. It's just some of those vertical lines showing through. I'm going to put in some sky. And lastly, a few little shadows underneath some of these clouds. And then stop. These little guys, essentially, it's like a black and white photo. Doing this will train your brain to look at a landscape and you'll see the values. They're also faster to do. And I'm finding that very often, because there's enough going on just with this, right? When you add color into the mix too, very often you'll be a little bit less focused on value. You'll notice in a moment I'm going to do something where I'm bringing color into it, and notice this nice contrast of value. I was just looking at it the other day and I realized, you know what? When I went into color, this is a better depiction of my values. Right? The next demonstration where I'm adding in color, you'll see that, okay, yeah, I got some colors there. You're still a little bit off. Unfortunately, my graphite pencil drawing is kind of holding a little bit of, but you'll see I'm a little bit off with my values. Great way to train yourself for value. Not to make value judgments or anything. I should just stop here and not suggest adding the other colors, but people will do that anyway because they're like, I want to make my sky blue. I want to make my forest green. Right? So let's go ahead and do that. At this point in the drawing where I've added here's some purple. We're back there at that point where I put some purple back here. I've put some purple in here, leaving some whites in Half Dome. Now I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to mess with some color. I'm going to put a little bit of value into these distant trees. And I'm also going to mix up a little bit of cyan paint. Very pale wash of light blue. And actually I should not call cyan light blue, of light cyan. And I'm going to put that into the back here. Distant objects get a pale, often sort of have a blue shift because of scattered blue wavelengths of light. Water vapor in the air scatters preferentially blue wavelengths of light, and that makes distant mountains and things have a little bit of a blue cast to them. So I'm going to put a light layer of that into here. See there, without, subtle, but with it. Now I'm going to mix up some green and put it in here. You notice, so this wasn't done intentionally, but I think it's really interesting. While I was doing this demonstration, I wasn't doing it for this purpose, but I noticed when I'm putting in my green, there's not that really nice value difference between this and this. If you kind of squint at it, you know, before there was some really nice darker values in here. I kind of missed that. And then I'm going to put that same cyan in the rest of my sky. A few clouds back here. One thing I will suggest on this, to improve your little landscape drawings, if you are using color in it, is to give yourself a limited color palette. It's okay to have 50 colors on your paint set, but what you're going to do is not use them all. The light at a specific time of day will give a certain kind of glow to objects around you. Evening light looks different than noon light. And you want things to look as if they're kind of bathed in the same sort of light. One way of getting this effect is by using only a small set of colors and just finding ways to reuse them in this picture. So in this here, here's the cyan that's coming in a pale area into here and into here. I have a light green, right, that's going into there, and a little bit of that same green went into here. And then I have my purpley color, right, that purple-gray color, and that goes in here, it went in here, it went in here, it went in here, and it went into these clouds back here. So I have, that purple, by the way, is Daniel Smith, Shadow Violet. So I have in this drawing 1, 2, 3 colors that I'm using. But I'm finding ways to use those throughout the picture, and that gives the picture a little bit more color harmony. It can start to feel a little more, I don't know, calico, if I have a little bit of this and a little bit of this and a little bit of this. Yes?
When I used to work and help people put a physical dress outfit together, like a print and 2 other colors, I would always say to them, there's got to be a marriage point. There's could be somewhere where they're talking to each other, or else they're not going to work together. There's got to be a marriage point. This one's got to talk to each other in some way. Like if this is a bright green, it's got to be some of that green over here because it's going to marry it together, kind of. So.
Mm-hmm. I like the way you're thinking about it. I don't know if that was heard on the camera. She was talking about how if you're putting clothes together, you want to have some of those colors. Sort of, there has to be a conversation between those different elements, and that sort of gives you the feeling that they're all kind of. So what some people will do is they'll do a drawing, but it will be all sort of warm colors. Right? They'll sort of play with warm colors, or one where you're playing with cool colors, or so that there's some kind of unifying hasp of color to parts of the drawings. One way you can also get this is that, for instance, right now I am feeling that this is a little bit jarring from the rest of this. If I wanted to kind of get this to play more nicely with the others, I could maybe take another little wash of cyan, the same color that I put into here, and just put it over that as well. Some of that into here. And so the more that those different colors, you want to unify parts of a watercolor. Sometimes what you can do is just make up a light wash of some color and just put it over those parts that you want to pull together. That's a fun strategy to use. So the idea here, should you be doing color on this, try a limited palette of colors. Try a limited palette watercolor. Instead of, hey, I've got, the 64 box of crayons, I'm going to use every color in there. I'm going to keep it simple for myself, reuse some of those things. They show up several places. Winslow Homer does this, although he will often have some other little accent off on the side. So if this was done by Winslow Homer, there would be a little red flag right here, or somewhere off on the side, like some little other element, so that it's yeah, and then there'll be some little ding. Somebody just go, oh, that little red hat off there. That gives you a sense of what's called color harmony. Right? You want those colors to harmonize with each other instead of like, oh, some of that, some of that, some of that, some of that. Yes?
On all of the drawings you've shown us, there are so many diagonal lines, or so many kind of triangular type things. Is that because that's in nature, or is that because of your vision of it?
I don't know. That's what an interesting question. I'm not really sure. Certainly on a valley with lots of things coming in, when you have straight sides, anytime you have a valley, a slope coming in, if you've got straight sides of your box, that will make things triangular that way. I wonder if that's partially an artifact of having a square frame. But I will have to kind of think about that question and kind of look back through some of my work and see if that's something that I'm putting in it. I do like triangles. So here's a few of the big take-home ideas. All right? We talked at the start about framing your shot, not letting your journal determine your composition. And then what you can do is you can creatively play with these different frame shapes and overlap them so you get a composition of your compositions. And again, what's the last time you got to make a really cool vertical format drawing? It gets you to sort of think differently. It opens up possibilities. There's nothing wrong with doing a large drawing, right? But really get this small landscapito idea into your repertoire. Play with it. As a matter of fact, for your homework, you owe me 5 landscapitos, right? So play with these ideas and see what happens. And if you don't like it, you don't have to do it. But I find that it really opens up some possibilities. And so, yeah, sloss here is a term that I stole from conservation biology. Sloss, when they're talking about sort of land management strategies, do you want to put all your money into saving one really big preserve? Or do you want to get a number of little tiny nature preserves that, like there's this rare plant on this one, this rare plant on this one, but it's not as much of an intact ecosystem. And it's this debate that goes back and forth, stands for single large or several small. So sloss comes to the Nature Journal. In that time where you could do a single large, you also could do several small. And it's up to you. Choose where you want to do that. We looked at several different types of media that are useful. So I'm finding things that allow you to get them wet and make areas of tone really fast, or using things that have broad tips is a very useful way of doing that. There wasn't a lot of detail. One of the drawings we did had those trees, right? I kind of put in 3 trees. But the rest of these, they didn't really get any detail. The small landscape allows you to get a very successful drawing without getting bogged down in that detail. We often think that a drawing is done when you've taken detail and sprinkled it over the entire drawing. Sometimes that just kills it. All right, so this you want to keep that those masses are the shapes of things. Yes, the detail, you really don't have to do that. Experiment with these 3 value steps. Look at the landscape in front of you and decide where you're going to place your 3 values. It's your choice. You're in control of that. And I sometimes find that when I'm limiting myself to something like that, often I am a little bit more articulate with where I am putting my light, where I'm putting my dark, where I'm leaving the paper untouched. I probably should have on here as another one of these steps is leave some whites. Leave some white paper. Please, all right? Leave some white paper. That will give your drawing the sparkle of those light areas. Same thing with your watercolors. If you're not leaving some of the white of the paper, your value range is not as great. You can't put any watercolor down that will be as bright as the white of that paper. So use that as one of your big compositional elements. And lastly, just have fun with this. You don't have to, it doesn't have to, you do several of these, some of them are not going to work out. Expect that. And it's okay. Hey, it's just 5 minutes. Right? But you'll notice, it doesn't matter how that drawing looks, having done it, your memory of that place will be improved. Right? So even if it ends up not being a pretty picture, you're still getting a ton out of doing that. And if that's your goal, I want to remember this, I want to teach myself to pay a little bit more attention here, it will give you permission to make a bunch of these, and if you make a bunch of these, I guarantee you they get better and better and better and better and better and better. So that is the art and science of the landscapito. Have some fun with it, bring it home, play with it, look for places that you can explore with that. You can even do it walking down the street of your hometown. If you're not in a rural area or a place where you're exposed to nature, the same thing applies to urban sketching. What are the series of sketches that tell the story of this place or this experience? That's different from the one massive drawing that gets it all. Just one more tool in your toolkit, and I hope you enjoy it. Thank you.